The announcement echoed through the airport lounge, low, cold, emotionless. But the story didn't begin there. It started earlier with a look that seemed ordinary, yet carried the weight of prejudice. Inside the luxurious Sky Nova lounge at JFK Airport, where executives in Armani suits discussed million-dollar contracts, one man sat quietly in the corner, Jordan Carter. He wore a soft grey hoodie, dark jeans, and clean white sneakers. No logos, no display of wealth, no noise, just a solitary figure, staring through the massive glass window at the runway, where silver arrows of airplanes pierced the indigo sky. No one knew that the man who looked like an ordinary engineer was actually the founder and CEO of Nexus Vision Labs, a tech company on the brink of revolutionizing the augmented reality industry. Tonight's flight, Sky Nova. 904 to Zurich wasn't just a journey. It was a gamble for survival. If Helvetia Capital Group, the renowned Swiss investment firm, signed the deal, Nexus Vision would rise to become a global powerhouse. If it failed, 800 employees, 5 years of startup struggle, and the future Jordan had sacrificed his youth for would crumble like sand meeting the tide. He took a sip of black coffee, his eyes falling to the small laptop bag beneath his feet, the one holding the agreement he had tuned through countless sleepless nights. Every line of that document was sweat, tears, and pride. A soft breeze brushed against the misty glass, carrying the faint sounds of clinking cups and polished shoes gliding over marble floors. No one paid Jordan much attention, or rather they noticed him just enough to judge. A man at the next table glanced over his look quietly, asking, "What's a black guy in a hoodie doing here?" Jordan had grown used to that question, even when it was never spoken aloud. He thought of his childhood in the Bronx, his mother a librarian, and his father a mechanic. They had taught him that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take away. And he had believed it his entire life. He had built Nexus Vision from a cramped garage, survived the brutal early years, earned the trust of skeptical investors, and now stood on the edge of his dream. But success hadn't changed him. Jordan preferred to stay invisible. He knew that when people judged by appearance being underestimated could become an advantage. The black leather Patek Philippe on his wrist, simple and understated, was hidden beneath his hoodie sleeve. It wasn't for show, it was a marker, a quiet trophy he had bought himself when the company turned its first profit, a reminder of the journey from nothing to something. From the corner of the lounge, he looked out through the glass wall as a Sky Nova jet taxied onto the runway, its lights flickering across his lenses. Jordan exhaled deeply. Everything was ready. All he needed now was to reach Zurich. The intercom voice came through calm and precise. Sky Nova Airlines Flight 904 to Zurich is now boarding first-class passengers. Jordan rose, slinging his bag over his shoulder. Heads turned, eyes following him out of habit. No one knew who he was, and that was exactly how he wanted it. In that moment, he felt an odd peace, the kind that comes only before a storm. The jet bridge was narrow, the cool air brushing against his collar. He presented his digital ticket, and the agent scanned the QR code with a polite smile. "Have a great flight, sir." He nodded in return. No one could have guessed that, just a few hours later on this very flight, a small act of prejudice and power would ignite a corporate earthquake worth $50 million. The first-class cabin unfolded before him, bathed in soft golden light, leather seats in beige tones, the air rich with the scent of wood and fine wine. Jordan found seat 2. By the window. He placed his bag overhead, sat down, and felt the smooth, cool leather beneath his fingertips. He closed his eyes, wishing for a brief moment of rest before the most important meeting of his life. But peace rarely lasts. A woman's voice cut through the calm, soft but cold. "Excuse me, sir. May I help you with something?" Jordan opened his eyes. Standing before him was Karen Blake, the lead flight attendant for first class, short blonde, bob crimson lipstick, and a frozen smile that looked painted on. Her name gleamed on the badge pinned to her chest. Jordan offered a polite smile. "I'm fine, thank you." Karen tilted her head slightly, her tone edged with suspicion. "This is the first-class cabin, sir." Jordan raised an eyebrow and held up his boarding pass. "Yes. Seat 2A. A brief pause. Then Karen smiled again, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Of course. Would you like something before takeoff? Champagne or orange juice? Just water, please." She turned away, her movements stiff each step, radiating a chill of discomfort. Jordan watched her go, a familiar heaviness settling in his chest. He had seen that look 1,000 times at luxury stores in 5-star hotels at investor galas, the look of someone who didn't believe he belonged. He turned to the window. The sky outside was streaked with amber light reflecting off the waiting aircraft. Jordan drew in a slow breath. In his mind, his mother's voice echoed warm, steady, and full of faith. "You can go anywhere, son, as long as you never let anyone make you believe you don't deserve to be there." He smiled faintly. This was only the beginning. He didn't know that within hours this very cabin would become the stage for a brutal test where his silence would force an entire corporation to confront itself. Outside, the plane began to roll, engines roaring softly as the runway lights stretched ahead. What seemed like an ordinary flight was, in truth, the start of an unforgettable reckoning. Flight Sky Nova 904 settled steadily on the tarmac, its engines humming like a metallic heartbeat. Passengers began boarding first class one by one, the soft golden light reflecting off their faces, people of status more familiar with a glass of champagne than a glass of water. Jordan Carter remained seated in seat 2, quietly scrolling through the presentation on his tablet. Numbers, charts, and strategies flowed across the screen in calm precision. They helped him focus, keeping his mind anchored away from the stares he could already feel. From the far end of the cabin, Karen Blake, the chief first-class flight attendant, was busy tending to passengers. Her smile was picture-perfect, but when her eyes flicked toward Jordan, there was a faint ripple in them. She said nothing, only adjusted a tray of drinks before turning away. Even without looking up, Jordan felt it, the faint prickling on his skin, the quiet tension that fills a room after someone has spoken ill of you. He took a slow breath, forcing his thoughts back to Zurich, to the deal that could change his life. But fate rarely allows focus for too long. The first-class cabin gradually filled. Across the aisle, a German man in a grey suit, smelling faintly of strong, woody cologne, settled into seat 2B. He nodded politely, then disappeared behind his financial newspaper. Behind them, a young French couple giggled softly as they poured red wine, their laughter tinkling through the still air like fragile glass bells. Jordan leaned back and closed his eyes. The PA system outside crackled with routine precision. Cabin crew prepare for departure. He told himself silently, 8 hours. I just need peace for 8 more hours. But then he arrived. A man of about 68, with neatly combed silver hair, a round belly, and a face flushed red with wine and arrogance. Edward Collins, a Platinum Elite passenger, a man who had flown this Zurich route for 15 straight years, and one who considered himself practically part of the airline. He stepped into the cabin as though walking into his own living room. Karen's demeanor changed instantly. The first genuine smile of the evening bloomed across her face. "Oh, Mr. Collins, it's wonderful to see you again. Still making your regular Zurich trips." Collins waved his hand with a hearty laugh. "Regular and boring, Karen, but at least I always have my favorite seat. 2A by the window." Jordan heard him. A chill crept down his spine. He opened his eyes slowly. Collins glanced his way just for a second, but that look carried it all: surprise, disdain, and the smug authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Is there some mistake?" he said, not to Jordan, but through him directing the question to Karen. "My seat 2A seems to be taken." Karen glanced at Jordan, her lips curved into a polite smile, her tone softening as she turned back to Collins. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Collins, must be a system error. I'll check immediately." Then she turned to Jordan. The smile vanished. Her voice hardened into official detachment. "So may I see your ticket, please?" Jordan lifted his screen calmly. "Here, seat 2A." Karen barely glanced at it, not even reading the details before turning back to Collins. "There's clearly been a mix-up. I'll sort this out right away." Collins chuckled loudly, his tone half amused, half mocking. "The system's a mess these days. In all my life, I've never seen anyone dressed so casually up here in first class." Several passengers looked up. Jordan raised his head, his eyes steady but cold. "I didn't know respect required a dress code, sir." The air froze. A few passengers pretended to read, others looked away. Karen's lips tightened as she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Mr. Carter, I'm afraid there's been a mistake. The system must have assigned the wrong seat. The airline has prepared another spot for you further back." The words "further back" dropped like acid. Jordan felt a sharp sting in his chest, a familiar ache that never dulled. "There's no mistake," he said quietly, each word measured and firm. "This is my seat. I paid for it in full." Karen tilted her head, her smile stiff. "Please, let's not make a scene. I'm only trying to keep things smooth. Mr. Collins is a Platinum Elite passenger. We can't what? Can't treat people equally." Jordan interrupted, his voice low and hard as steel. The air grew heavier. The German man in 2B lowered his paper, but kept his eyes hidden. The French couple fell silent. Karen's composure cracked. She turned and spoke sharply into her radio. "Captain, I need you at first class immediately. We have a passenger refusing to cooperate." Captain Thomas Reynolds arrived minutes later, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and pilot insignia gleaming on his shoulders. His gaze swept over Jordan, then stopped on Collins. And in that single second, his judgment was made not by reason, but by bias. "Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Captain Reynolds. Is there a problem here?" Karen jumped in before Jordan could answer, her tone carefully pitched. The passenger in seat 2A seems to have mistaken his seat at captain. That seat belongs to Mr. Collins. Reynolds turned to Jordan, his voice carrying the weight of unquestioned authority. "Sir, I need your cooperation. To avoid delaying the flight, please move to the economy cabin. We'll sort this out after landing." Jordan looked him directly in the eye. "There's no mistake. You haven't checked the ticket or verified anything. You just looked at me and decided I was wrong." Reynolds's brow furrowed. "I'm not here to argue. You're obstructing the flight." "No," Captain Jordan replied evenly. "I'm just sitting in the seat I paid for." No one in the cabin breathed. The tension hung thick, almost visible. Karen reached overhead, opening the luggage compartment, speaking through clenched teeth. "Please don't make this difficult, sir. We can find you a more comfortable seat." Jordan stood, towering half a head above her. His eyes were cold, not from anger, but from exhaustion with moments like this. "I don't need to be made comfortable. I need to be respected," Karen faltered. Collins let out a dismissive snort. "Good grief, must we make such a fuss? He's clearly a coach passenger." The word coach sliced through the air like a knife. Jordan looked around, meeting dozens of eyes, some curious, some cautious, some laced with pity. He knew that if he resisted, they'd drag him out. If he protested, they'd label him disruptive. He took a slow breath. "All right," he said softly. "If that's how your airline treats its customers." He reached up, retrieved his bag, and without another word walked down the aisle. Past the first-class seats, past the thin curtain that separated privilege from everyone else, a curtain that in that moment felt like a concrete wall. The sound of the curtain sliding shut behind him was like a prison door closing. From the front, the pop of a champagne cork echoed, followed by Colin's booming laughter. Finally, peace and quiet. Jordan kept walking down the narrow aisle, past rows of watching faces. A young flight attendant, Jenna Lee, with a kind expression and gentle Asian features, spoke softly, "Seat 34B, sir." Jordan nodded, settling between two strangers. The seat was cramped, the air filled with the smell of food and plastic, and somewhere nearby a baby cried. He turned toward the tiny window, watching the runway lights fade into the distance. In first class, people raised their glasses. In economy, one man sat in silence, clutching a laptop bag against his knees. In his mind, one thought repeated over and over, "It's all right." But this time they'll remember. The engines roared. The plane lifted from the ground. None of them knew that the man they had just forced from seat 2A was holding the $50 million contract that could determine their airline's future. And as Skynova 904 climbed into the night sky, another kind of storm began to form, not of wind or thunder, but of justice deep within Jordan Carter's heart. The engines roared steadily through the night, their sound a deep pulse beneath the cabin. The soft yellow light in economy did nothing to hide the exhaustion on the passengers' faces. In the middle of a narrow row, Jordan Carter sat in seat 34B, his shoulders squeezed between a drowsy student on one side and a mother soothing her baby, whose ears hurt from the change and pressure. From the start of the flight, he had not said a single word. He just stared at the back of the seat in front of him, that hard grey plastic, speckled with fingerprints and snack crumbs, as if it were a wall, an invisible barrier between two different worlds. Above him, first class was throwing a miniature party. He could hear the pop of champagne corks, the rise of loud laughter, and in the middle of it, the raspy voice of Edward Collins. Now this cabin feels like it's proper class again. Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to keep himself from exploding. He had been through situations like this many times before, but somehow this time hurt in a way that cut deeper. The first time he had been suspected because of his skin color was when he was 16. A store clerk had chased him out into the street, accusing him of stealing just because he had accidentally picked up the wrong jacket to try on. That day, he had cried. But today, he didn't cry anymore. Now the humiliation no longer spilled out. As tears, it had solidified into a cold block of metal in his chest. Jordan took a deep breath, his mind spinning as images of his Nexus Vision team flashed through his thoughts. Young engineers, programmers working late into the night, the eyes that had trusted him when he promised, "We are building this company on real values." Real values. And now he was being forced into the cheap seats just because a man with a higher tier on his membership card had decided he didn't belong in that space. Anger rose in him like a rising tide, but he refused to let it evaporate. He locked it down, letting it simmer instead, because he knew rage alone never created justice. Only clarity changed power. Jordan lowered the tray table, slid his slim carbon fiber laptop out of the bag. The Nexus Vision logo glowed faintly under the cabin light. He opened it, connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi. The signal was weak and patchy, but eventually the word "connected" appeared. The cool blue light from the screen washed over his face. His dark eyes were deep and steady like mountain stone. His fingers began to move fast and precise, as if every keystroke were a bullet fired from his contained fury. To Daniel.alt@whitmorebskinova.com. CC Board of Directors of Sky Nova Airlines, Head of Corporate Accounts, Nexus Vision Executive Board, Senior Editor at the Wall Street Journal Technology Correspondent at the New York Times. Subject immediate termination of $50 million annual corporate travel partnership, Nexus Vision Labs. He leaned back in his seat, inhaled slowly, then began to write. Not in the language of emotion, but in the language of systems. The language people like Karen or Collins never truly understood, but that could make an entire corporation tremble. Dear Mr. Whitmore, I am writing this email from seat 34B on flight SNX 904 from New York to Zurich. I hold a fully paid ticket for seat 2A in the first-class cabin, yet I have been forced to leave that seat to make room for another customer of higher status. My name is Jordan Carter, founder and CEO of Nexus Vision Labs. Tonight I am traveling to Zurich to sign an investment agreement with Helvetia Capital Group, a deal in which Sky Nova was being considered as the exclusive travel partner, valued at $50 million over 5 years. As of this moment, I am officially informing you that Nexus Vision is terminating all ongoing discussions with Sky Nova Airlines. All corporate accounts, contracts, and travel privileges with your airline will be cancelled as soon as I return to New York. The reason is simple: discriminatory behavior, unprofessional conduct, and ethical violations by your crew on this flight. I was instructed by flight attendant Karen Blake to vacate the seat I had purchased in front of the entire first-class cabin so that a man named Edward Collins could take it solely because he holds a higher-tier membership. When I requested verification, your staff made no effort to check the system or confirm the ticket. Instead, they summoned Captain Thomas Reynolds, who made the final decision based entirely on my appearance. I was offered a choice between moving to economy or being removed from the aircraft by security. I chose silence, not because I am weak, but because I understood in that moment that these individuals had already destroyed their own future. The issue is not which seat I occupy. The issue is how your airline chooses to treat customers of color as if they are inherently less worthy of respect. A company can hang as many diversity and inclusion posters in its offices as it likes, but they are meaningless if the people in uniform behave like gatekeepers of racial hierarchy. From now on, $50 million is no longer a contract. It is the price Sky Nova will pay for its own arrogance. Sincerely, Jordan Carter, CEO, Nexus Vision Labs. He read it twice. No additions, no deletions. Every sentence cut like a cold blade. No need to shout. In that moment, Jordan was no longer the man who had been humiliated. He was the man rewriting the rules of the game. His finger hovered over the send button. In his mind, Colin's voice echoed again. He is just a coach passenger. Jordan pressed send. With a single click, a $50 million shockwave began to move silently through the night sky. Somewhere on the ground at Sky Nova headquarters in Chicago, a chain of events was already being set in motion. But Jordan did not need to see it. He simply closed the laptop and rested his head against the seat. A strange feeling spread through his chest, not triumph, but release. He had not needed to shout. He had not needed to trade insult for insult. He had simply used the weight of the truth. As the aisle lights glowed softly, the young flight attendant, Jenna Lee, walked past. Her eyes lingered on him for a second. She knew. She had seen the way Karen had yanked the curtain closed with that smug satisfaction. Without a word, Jenna quietly placed a fresh bottle of water on his tray. Just a small gesture, but filled with understanding. Jordan gave a faint smile and whispered, "Thank you." She only nodded and said softly, "I hope you have a safe journey, Mr. Carter." The plane hurtled across the ocean, the moonlight spilling across its silver wings like molten metal. Passengers drifted into sleep one by one. Only Jordan stayed fully awake, eyes turned toward the small window, watching the city lights below slowly vanish. He remembered his father's words, "You cannot fix every person, but you can do something that makes them think again." He closed his eyes not to forget, but to wait. He knew that when dawn broke over Zurich, the people who had dismissed him would wake up to a very real nightmare. And at 35,000 feet, a quiet revolution had already begun. At more than 30,000 feet, while every passenger lay deep in sleep, an invisible bomb had already gone off. There was no smoke, no fire, but its shockwave was about to shake an entire airline to its core. At Sky Nova Airlines headquarters in Chicago, the wall clock read 2:15 in the afternoon. In a conference room on the 40th floor, where the glass windows looked out over Lake Michigan, a vice president in charge of corporate accounts was holding a cup of coffee. A small ding sounded from the laptop screen in front of him. Subject immediate termination of $50 million annual partnership Nexus Vision Labs. He read it, and it felt as if the blood in his veins stopped flowing. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, spilling across the table and leaving a smeared brown stain over the draft partnership contract they had prepared that very morning. He read it a second time, then a third, his heart pounding faster with each line. Every sentence from Jordan Carter was as cold as a death sentence. In less than a minute, he was calling directly to the office of Chief Executive Officer Daniel Whitmore, bypassing every layer of assistance. His voice shook. "Daniel, we have a problem. A very big problem." In Chief Executive Officer Whitmore's boardroom, they had been discussing fuel strategy and international market share. He was a man in his early 50s, tall and lean with eyes that were usually calm, but when his assistant burst in, hands shaking around a tablet, his face suddenly drained of color. On the screen was Jordan's email, complete with signature, copied to the entire board of directors, the public relations department, and even 2 journalists at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. It was not a threat. It was not an angry rant. It was an indictment written with precision and power. Whitmore read every line, and the only thing he felt was an icy chill running down his spine. "My God, Jordan Carter," he whispered, then almost shouted. "This is the CEO of Nexus Vision, The contract is worth $50 million. Who is responsible for that flight? Without waiting for an answer, he slammed his hand on the table and barked, "Activate code red. Contact flight SNX904 immediately. I want to know what happened and exactly who is involved." High above the Atlantic in the quiet cockpit, Captain Thomas Reynolds was sipping coffee when a shrill beep-beep sounded from the flight data printer. A strip of white paper fed out. In bold capital letters it read, "Code Red Urgent. Confirm all passenger Jordan Carter, CEO Nexus Vision Labs on board. Report on incident involving crew member Karen Blake and passenger Edward Collins immediately. CEO Whitmore is on the line." Thomas froze. The cup of coffee slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Guio Jordan Carter. The name was all too familiar. He remembered that just a few weeks earlier, Sky Nova had proudly announced that Nexus Vision would become its largest partner in virtual reality flight technology, a contract worth $50 million, and he had just sent that CEO back to seat 34B. A wave of cold ran down his neck. He turned to his first officer, his voice rough. "My God, we just shot ourselves in the head." Reynolds pressed the intercom button. "Purser Mark, tell Karen to report to the cockpit. Immediately." In first class, Karen Blake was pouring another drink for Collins, her face glowing with smug satisfaction. When she heard the urgent call from the cockpit, she froze, forced a strained smile at Collins, and hurried away. Mark watched her go, suspicion in his eyes. In his 20 years as a flight attendant, he had never heard a captain summon someone with a voice that shaky. In the cockpit, Reynolds was breaking into a cold sweat. He heard the CEO's voice over the satellite headset. "Reynolds confirmed this for me is Jordan Carter on that flight. Yes, sir. He was assigned to seat 2A, but he is currently seated in 34B. 34B? Why is a partner, CEO, sitting in the economy cabin?" Reynolds swallowed hard. "There was a small misunderstanding, sir. Another passenger complained. So a misunderstanding," Whitmore's voice hissed through the speaker. "You may have just cost this company $50 million and possibly its global reputation. I want to know exactly what happened and the names of every person involved." When Karen stepped into the cockpit, she was still smiling. "Captain, is there an emergency?" Reynolds looked up. For the first time in his 20 years of flying, his eyes were filled with outright fear. "Karen, the man you forced out of seat 2A, is the CEO of Nexus Vision Labs, the man about to sign a $50 million contract with our airline." Karen froze. 1 second passed, then 2 before her lips began to tremble. "That is impossible. I did not know. You did not know," Reynolds growled. "You may have just bankrupted us." Karen's face went pale as she stumbled back, almost unable to breathe. He did not say anything. "I just assumed." "You assumed that a man in a hoodie could not possibly belong in first class, is that it?" Reynolds shouted. She did not answer. The hand holding her radio slipped the device clattering against the glass with a harsh metallic ring. Behind her, Purser Mark was on the line, to Jenna, his voice urgent. "Jenna, find the passenger who was moved from 2A. Where is he sitting now?" "Seat 34B, right side aisle, sir." "Good. Brace yourself. Something big is happening." Jenna looked toward the back of the cabin and saw Jordan, still seated, the light from his laptop screen illuminating his face. She had no idea what was unfolding, but she could feel it clearly. A storm was on its way. About 10 minutes later, Karen appeared in the economy aisle. She no longer had the bearing of someone in control. Her face was ghostly white, her eyes wide, her hands trembling as she gripped the seatbacks for balance. Passengers watched her, curious. Jordan lifted his head, his deep, dark eyes locking onto hers. Karen stopped, her throat tightening. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, as if speaking the name of a verdict. I am very sorry. There has been a misunderstanding. Captain Reynolds would like to invite you back to first class." "We deeply regret," Jordan cut her off. His voice was quiet but cold and sharp as a blade. "A misunderstanding, no, Miss Blake. Everything is perfectly clear. You understood me from the very beginning. You simply misjudged who I am." Karen forced a smile, tears brimming in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Carter, please return to your seat in first class. We will fix this." Jordan looked at her, then slowly shook his head. "You cannot fix what you refuse to acknowledge. Respect is not something you restore. It either exists or it does not." Without another word, he turned back to the window, where a band of white cloud drifted peacefully, as if nothing at all had happened. Karen stood frozen. The entire economy cabin fell silent. A few passengers whispered, "What is going on?" She tried to speak, but her throat locked up. After a few heavy seconds, Jordan simply said, "You should go back to first class now. I think they need you more than I do." Karen turned and walked away like a sleepwalker. Her second walk of shame had begun, this time without champagne, only the contemptuous stares of her own colleagues. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Reynolds's hands shook as he called the CEO again. "Sir Whitmore, we have spoken to Mr. Carter. He refused to return." Good Whitmore replied coldly, "Tell him he does not need to. We will meet when you land." And Reynolds, "Yes, sir. You and Karen Blake should prepare your resignations." Reynolds let go of the radio and covered his face with both hands. He knew his career had ended in mid-air. Down in economy, Jordan remained silent. Jenna walked past, then stopped, and asked softly, "They hurt you, didn't they?" He gave a faint, dry smile. "No, Jenna. They only hurt themselves." The soft cabin light brushed his cheek, his face calm, as if everything had been planned. Outside, the plane slid through a thin layer of cloud, reflecting the silver glow of the moon. A strange silence settled over the cabin, the kind that comes before a storm, when no one has yet realized that the balance of power on this flight has just shifted. And in that moment, high in the night sky, the man who had been forced out of seat, 2A, was quietly rewriting history with a terrifying composure. The sky in the east was beginning to soften as the first light of dawn slipped through the small window, painting a streak of orange gold across the airplane wing. Skynova flight SNX 904 had been in the air for 8 hours, 8 long hours of tension, stretched tight like a violin string. In first class, the laughter had faded. Collins was dozing off his head, tilted to one side, a faint snore slipping from his half-open mouth. His glass of champagne sat half-empty on the table, the bubbles long dead. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds sat motionless, his hands clasped tightly together, his eyes staring blankly at the route displayed on the screen. Every number there no longer felt like data. It felt like a countdown to the end of his career. In economy, Jordan Carter was still sitting upright, his posture calm, his expression strangely composed. He had not slept. In his mind, he no longer heard the engines. He heard only his own thoughts, heavy but clear. It was not anger anymore, it was a plan taking shape. He had sent the email. That wave had already left his hands, spreading outward like a satellite signal. Now he was simply waiting for the consequences to come back to him. The chime sounded, and Purser Mark Alvarez's low voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Zurich. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. There was a slight tremor in his voice, though he kept the professional rhythm. Jordan looked outside. Through the small window, the snowy peaks of the Alps appeared glowing in the early light. He drew in a deep breath. The air looked cold and pure, but inside him there was only the chill of justice that was about to arrive. The plane touched down on the runway with a gentle bump. The brakes screeched softly, and a heavy stillness settled over the cabin. No one spoke. The silence inside felt like that of a church. When the aircraft came to a complete stop, the intercom clicked on again. This time, Mark's voice sounded different, stern and grave. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived in Zurich. However, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Captain Reynolds and lead flight attendant Karen Blake have been requested to remain on board until ground representatives can meet with them in person. For a brief moment, there was absolute stillness. Then the whispers spread like a brush fire. What was that? Is something wrong? Sounds like they are about to be disciplined. Jordan remained silent. His gaze fixed on the tarmac outside, where the ground service team was approaching. A black luxury car pulled up right at the base of the aircraft stairs. A tall man stepped out dressed in a black suit, his face drawn tight and pale. This was Michael Lawson, Sky Nova's vice president for the European region. Jordan recognized him immediately. He had met him at a tech conference in Berlin the year before, the same man who had once clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Looking forward to working with Nexus Vision sometime soon." Now Lawson walked quickly up the stairs, phone in hand, listening to instructions from Chicago. On the way here, he had received more than 10 calls from Chief Executive Officer Whitmore, from Global Public Relations, from Legal, and from the Crisis Communications team. The name Nexus Vision was blazing across every internal screen inside Sky Nova. The cabin door opened. A blast of Zurich's morning air rushed in, mixing the smell of jet fuel with cold mist. Lawson stepped inside, exchanged a quick word with Mark, his voice rough but firm. Who was moved out of seat, too. Mark did not answer with words, he simply pointed toward the back of economy. Lawson looked down the aisle and saw Jordan there, grey hoodie laptop bag neatly placed at his feet, his expression calm like a man waiting for something inevitable. Without hesitation, Lawson walked straight down the center aisle, passing all of first class without a glance. Collins had just woken up and was frowning after him, annoyed at being ignored. Passengers whispered and watched the suited executive make his way through the cabin. No one knew who he was, but they could sense something serious was unfolding. At row 34, Lawson stopped and bowed his head deeply. "Mr. Carter, my name is Michael Lawson, Vice President of Sky Nova Europe. I, on behalf of the entire company, want to offer you our most sincere apology, although I know no excuse can make up for what you have gone through." The whispering cut off at once. Every person nearby held their breath. Jordan lifted his head slightly. His eyes were not cold and not blazing with anger either. They held a quiet composure that forced Lawson to bow even lower. "I acknowledge your apology, Mr. Lawson." Jordan's voice was low and even, but every word felt like the edge of a thin blade. "However, I am afraid the damage your company has suffered cannot be contained within a simple statement." Lawson nodded quickly, his voice trembling. "I understand. Our Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Whitmore, has been in contact with me throughout your flight. We take full responsibility. There is a car waiting to take you to your hotel. Any expense, any request, whatever you need, you have only to say it." Jordan rose slowly from his seat. The entire economy cabin was silent as they watched him, the man who had been pushed back here 8 hours earlier, now being escorted out like a head of state. He shouldered his backpack and turned to Lawson. "I will not be asking for anything more. I have already done what I needed to do." Lawson swallowed hard. "Thank you. And if I may, just to ensure complete transparency, I would like to personally escort you off the aircraft." They walked forward together. Each row they passed fell completely quiet, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps in the thick air. When they entered first class, Edward Collins was already standing in the aisle near the exit, his face flushed red, his voice sharp. "What on earth is going on here? How long do I have to wait to get off this plane?" Lawson turned toward him, his expression turning to steel. "Mr. Collins, I strongly suggest you sit down. Your membership status is currently suspended, pending investigation. Someone will be in contact with you after this flight is over." Collins's mouth dropped open. The words hit him like a slap to the face. "You cannot do that. I have been a platinum customer for 15 years, and that is exactly why you should understand the responsibility that comes with privilege." Lawson cut in his tone, ice cold. "Sit down." Collins staggered back, his lips trembling, but no more words came out. Jordan gave him a brief glance, then looked away. Just before the cockpit door, Captain Reynolds and Karen Blake were standing frozen, their faces ashen, their bodies stiff like mannequins. Their uniforms were still pressed and immaculate, but the light falling on them exposed everything, the fear, the numbness, and the certainty that everything was over. Jordan stopped and looked at them for a few seconds. He said nothing. He did not need to. His silence weighed more than any angry outburst. Reynolds bowed his head and managed to force out, "Mr. Carter." "I am sorry." Jordan gave a slight nod. "Now you understand. A small decision, one you thought would simply keep the flight on schedule, can cost an entire airline everything." Then he turned away and walked past them, leaving behind two people standing on the brink of their own collapse. When Jordan stepped onto the jet bridge, the Zurich light struck his face directly. At the far end of the walkway, two Sky Nova staff members bowed, and a driver in a suit held open the door of a gleaming black sedan. Jordan paused and glanced through the large glass window. Outside, the sunlight was spilling across Lake Zurich, shimmering like liquid gold. He closed his eyes and breathed in deeply. In his mind, his mother's voice returned warm and proud. "You do not need to shout for people to hear you. You just need to stand straight and let the truth speak for you." He opened his eyes and walked into the light. Behind him, Karen and Reynolds still stood at the aircraft door, silent as they watched him go like two shadows that had just had their wings torn away. Flight SNX 904 was over, but its aftershocks were only beginning. The story that started in Seat 2A would soon become a global headline, and for Jordan Carter, it was not just a personal victory. It was the beginning of justice at 35,000 feet. The suite door swung open, revealing a space so vast that even a whisper could echo. The presidential suite of the Lakeside Grand Zurich Hotel, reserved for heads of state and billionaires, was bathed in the soft golden glow of crystal chandeliers. On a polished ebony table sat a bottle of Dom Perignon, 2008 chilling, in a silver ice bucket. Beside it, a massive bouquet of white orchids and a thick envelope embossed with the Sky Nova Airlines logo. Jordan stood in silence, taking in the scene. Everything was perfect, too perfect, as if it had been arranged to soothe a wound that those who caused it were too afraid to face. He set his suitcase down, removed his headphones, took off his hoodie, and slipped off his shoes. The air carried the faint scent of expensive perfume and cold metal. It was beautiful, yet utterly hollow. Jordan opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Chief Executive Officer Daniel Whitmore. Dear Mr. Carter, I send you my deepest apologies for the shameful incident that occurred on Flight SNX 904. The actions of our employees do not reflect the values or standards of Skynova. I take full responsibility and promise that this will never happen again. We have prepared this suite for you, along with a private car and a support team during your stay. Please accept my sincerest apologies. Daniel Whitmore. Jordan read the letter to the end, then folded it carefully. The paper was thick, the ink expensive, the handwriting graceful, an attempt to convey sincerity. But to him, every word felt like a hollow ritual, like laying flowers on a grave when you no longer remember the name of the dead. He looked around the lavish room. White walls, velvet curtains, a king-sized bed dressed in satin sheets. Beyond the glass windows stretched an astonishing view, Lake Zurich shimmering under the moonlight, white boats drifting quietly, and the Alps in the distance glowing like blocks of silver. And in the middle of all that beauty, he felt out of place. There was no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only a deep, quiet weariness, the kind only those who have been humiliated for simply existing could understand. He walked into the marble-tiled bathroom. The sound of running water filled the room, reflecting off the mirror, where a solitary man stood in the glare of sterile white light. Jordan stared at his reflection, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slightly slumped, as though carrying the weight of the world. He stripped off each layer of clothing, the grey hoodie that had been mistaken for proof that he did not belong in first class, the dark jeans, the clean white sneakers. They fell to the cold floor, lying there, like evidence from an invisible trial he had just survived. He stepped into the shower, turned the hot water up until his skin flushed red. The water poured down like a storm, hitting his shoulders, his neck, his chest, washing away the grime of travel and the invisible residue of humiliation clinging to his skin. He closed his eyes, letting the water peel away the invisible armor he had worn throughout that flight. In his mind, his father's voice echoed, "When you are judged by how you look, don't waste your breath defending yourself. Let your success be your proof." He inhaled deeply, the hot water searing his lungs. Behind his closed eyelids, the faces of Karen Collins and Captain Reynolds flickered in and out, each marked by arrogance before dissolving like smoke. Jordan opened his eyes and watched the water swirl down the drain, carrying with it the last traces of anger, humiliation, and wounded pride. When he turned off the tap, the room filled with mist. He dried his hair slowly, his eyes softening. In the mirror, a different man began to take form, not the one who had been humiliated in seat 34B, but Jordan Carter, founder of Nexus Vision Labs. From his suitcase, he pulled out a navy blue suit tailored on Savile Row, perfectly pressed, as if waiting for this very moment. A crisp white shirt, a red tie, black Oxford shoes, polished to a mirror, shine every item carried meaning. They were symbols of years of labor, of countless investor meetings, of the many times he had fallen and stood up again. He fastened the platinum cufflinks, engraved with the initials JC, the final gift his mother had given him before she passed away. His fingers trembled slightly, not from emotion, but from the feeling of stepping back into his true form, not hidden, not diminished to make others comfortable. When he was done, he looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was strong, his eyes sharp, his posture steady. Yet deep down, Jordan knew that true strength did not come from the suit. It came from the man who had endured humiliation and still chosen to act with reason. He smiled faintly and murmured, "Now it's their turn to learn how to bow their heads." An hour later, his phone vibrated. A message from Michael Lawson read, "Mr. Carter, CEO Whitmore, and I would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock in the private conference room on the ground floor of the Lakeside Grand. We wish to apologize in person and discuss a path forward." Jordan looked at the message and typed 3 simple words, "I will come." He set the phone down on the table and walked toward the balcony. The early morning breeze drifted through, carrying the scent of flowers and the faint sound of water brushing against the stone shore. Across the lake, Zurich's city lights shimmered on the surface like a trail of fallen stars. He stood there for a long while, holding a glass of water, not drinking, just staring into the distance. The Swiss night was calm, silent, almost sacred. But within Jordan, a current was rising. Tomorrow he would not just face an apology, he would face an opportunity to change the system itself. Not for himself, but for those like him, for the ones who had been judged dismissed and pushed out of the seats they rightfully earned. He walked back inside and turned off the lights. The only glow left came from the city outside, filtering through the curtains and falling across the suit hanging neatly on the rack. Next to it lay the grey hoodie, folded carefully on the chair. 2 halves of the same man, 2 worlds existing side by side. But tonight, Jordan understood they were both him. The humble man in the hoodie was the one who built the empire. The man in the suit was the one who would make an entire corporation kneel in apology. He whispered under his breath, "Justice doesn't come from shouting. It comes when those with power choose to do what's right." Then he closed his eyes, letting exhaustion finally take him. Outside, Lake Zurich glimmered like molten silver, reflecting the gaze of a man reborn after a long night. And as the clock struck midnight, Jordan Carter, the man once removed from seat 2, was ready for a morning that would make the world remember his name, not for glory, but for the justice he was about to restore. Morning in Zurich. The early sunlight slid through the oak leaves and spilled over the still surface of the lake like glass. In the grand lobby of the Lakeside Grand Hotel, everything was arranged with meticulous care, from the white orchid arrangements on the tables to the steaming espresso cups in the corner. The air carried a particular feeling, a mixture of anticipation and fear. At exactly 8:59, Jordan Carter arrived. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and a dark red tie, the color of dried blood, his steps firm as he crossed the lobby. No bodyguards, no entourage. Just a black man walking quietly, yet his presence seemed to slow the entire room. The receptionist bowed and guided him toward a private ground floor meeting room. The oak door opened, and he stepped inside. Michael Lawson was already standing, and Daniel Whitmore, the chief executive officer of Sky Nova, appeared on a large screen in the center of the table. His face was gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, his tie loosened, as if he had just lived through a night of crisis. No one spoke. Jordan pulled out a chair and sat down across from them, his hands loosely clasped together. Silence settled over the room, the kind of silence that forces people who once held power to lower their heads. Whitmore broke it first. His voice was hoarse, weary but not weak. "Mr. Carter, I have read your email more than 10 times. I have reviewed the flight report, listened to the crew recordings, and read every statement from passengers. There is no word that can justify what we did. I am not here today to save a contract. I am here to confess." Michael Lawson bowed his head, his hands clenched tightly in front of his chest. Jordan said nothing, his gaze cutting straight through them, not searching for excuses, but for truth in their posture. Whitmore continued, his voice trembling. "I lead a company of 20,000 employees. I have always believed we stood for progress and modernity. But last night I realized Sky Nova is only a polished shell covering a deeply rooted disease, the disease of prejudice." He drew a long breath and looked straight into the camera. What Captain Reynolds and Karen Blake did was not just a personal mistake. It was the failure of the system I run. And I am responsible. His words dropped heavily like stones into water. Jordan remained still, his expression unreadable, but inside he felt something shift just a little. At least this man knew how to call the wrong thing by its name. Lawson added his voice, catching. They were suspended the moment the plane landed. And I can guarantee they will never work in aviation again. Jordan gave a slight nod, then spoke, his voice low, clear, and commanding. Firing them is the easiest part. The short sentence sliced through the air like a blade. Both Whitmore and Lawson froze. Jordan looked straight at the screen, his tone calm, but razor-sharp. "You know, Daniel, when Karen kicked me out of seat 2A, I did not just lose a seat. I lost faith that this world was as advanced as it claims to be. One small moment, but it exposed an entire culture, a culture where people still believe their power allows them to judge others by skin color, by a hoodie, by where they sit." He paused for a beat, then went on, his voice dropping into a steady rhythm like a hammer striking metal. "You can fire them, issue a press release, send flowers and money, but if that culture remains, then Sky Nova is only changing its mask, not its core. I am not here to hear you say you are sorry. I am here to see whether you have the courage to change." Whitmore inhaled deeply and nodded. "Then tell me what needs to be done. I will listen." Jordan leaned back slightly, a cool light of reason in his eyes. "I do not want money, and I do not want special treatment. I want real change, public, transparent, and meaningful." He raised 4 fingers and laid out each point. "First, Sky Nova will not simply fire Reynolds and Blake. Their names must be entered into your internal industry database with a clear note: discriminatory behavior and violation of professional ethics. I do not want them to simply change uniforms and continue flying for another airline. I want them to learn to see the person before they see the seat." Whitmore bowed his head. "I agree. Second, you will hire an independent firm that specializes in diversity assessment and corporate culture. Not a superficial consultant, but a team that has gone into the biggest corporations and challenged them. They will examine Sky Nova from the inside out: pilots, technicians, ground staff, management. And most importantly, their report will be published on your company website. No editing, no burying." Lawson shook his head slightly. "That will trigger a media crisis. No Jordan cut in it will save your reputation, because for the first time, Sky Nova will have the courage to face the truth." Whitmore looked at Lawson, then said, "Do it, immediately. Third, you will issue a public apology. You will not use lifeless phrases like an unfortunate incident or "This does not reflect our values." That statement will name the flight, describe the discriminatory behavior, and admit that Sky Nova failed to uphold equality. You will not dodge the term racial profiling. You will call it exactly what it is. Whitmore closed his eyes for a long moment, then opened them again, his gaze steady. "I understand, and I will do it. Before sunset today, that statement will be released." Jordan nodded, then lowered his voice as if preparing for the final blow. "And finally, the fourth point. I will give Sky Nova a chance to make this right, but the first $5 million of the $50 million Nexus Vision contract will not go to you. That amount will be donated in a single payment split equally between the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. Do not label it corporate social responsibility. Call it what it is, an act of atonement. An investment in the next generation, so that one day, when a talented black child is good enough to sit in first class, they are not asked whether they are in the wrong seat." The room went completely still. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard. Whitmore looked up, his eyes exhausted, but strangely bright. "The board will hate me for this, but they will have to live with it. You have my word, Jordan. Every one of your conditions I accept." Jordan nodded. "Good. I will wait for written confirmation before I fly home." Whitmore gave a faint, tight smile, his voice thick. "You know, I do not think I have ever learned a more expensive lesson in my life. Thank you for not choosing silence." Jordan rose and gathered his papers. He looked at Lawson, then into the screen at Whitmore, still sitting in his Chicago office daylight, reflecting in his eyes. "I am not doing this for myself. I am doing it for the people who will board your planes tomorrow, for the ones who will never have to live through what I just did." He turned and walked toward the door. The air in the room remained quiet, but inside, everyone present, something had shifted for good. When the door closed, Michael Lawson exhaled and glanced at the screen. Whitmore spoke softly, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Remember today, Michael. This is not Sky Nova's failure. This is the day Sky Nova finally learned how to fly in the right direction." Outside, Jordan stepped into a corridor flooded with sunlight. The breeze from the lake drifted in, carrying the scent of flowers and the faint, metallic tang of water. He drew in a deep breath and felt something inside his chest finally loosen. Not his anger, but his restored belief. And in the brilliant Zurich morning, the man who had once been driven out of Seat 2A allowed himself a small smile. He knew that justice had just taken flight, and this time it would never be brought down. Late afternoon. Zurich shimmered in a metallic glow beneath the sunset. The last rays of light brushed across the lake's edge, reflecting off the glass facade of the Helvetia Capital Group headquarters, where Jordan Carter was about to give the most important presentation of his life. He entered the grand lobby. His navy suit perfectly pressed his expression, calm and assured. No one there knew that just 24 hours earlier, this same man had been forced out of a first-class seat. To them he was a CEO, a visionary arriving to present the future. To himself, this was the moment to prove that dignity could never be taken away no matter the circumstance. The Helvetia boardroom gleamed with oak panels and a long glass table reflecting the warm light above. 5 Swiss executives sat across from him, serious but courteous. At the center was Chairman Klaus Dietrich, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, who gave a polite nod. "Mr. Carter," he said in a crisp mix of German and English, "we have heard much about the vision of Nexus Vision. Today show us why you believe your technology can change the world." Jordan smiled, not the smile of a man seeking approval, but of one who knows his worth. He activated the presentation, the blue glow illuminating his face. Calm, focused, powerful. The presentation began. On the screen appeared vivid visuals of Nexus Vision's augmented reality technology, surgeons performing operations, assisted by three-dimensional overlays, teachers and students interacting in real time across continents, architects designing buildings through intuitive AI visualization. Jordan's voice was deep and steady, carrying the weight of someone who had already walked through fire. We are not just building software. We are building a new way to see the world, where the line between human and technology is not a wall, but a bridge. A technology that excludes no one, that judges no one by color, language, or origin. Because only when everyone is seen and everyone is acknowledged can the world truly move forward. The room fell silent. Jordan didn't need to pound the table or shout slogans. He simply spoke with truth and conviction, something no PowerPoint slide could replicate. Dietrich glanced around the table, then smiled. Mr. Carter, I have invested for 40 years, but it is rare to see someone speak of technology with such humanity. Helvetia Capital is honored to become a strategic partner of Nexus Vision. Jordan bowed his head slightly. In that moment, he understood something profound. Justice is not only about reclaiming what was taken, it is about proving that you can still rise, even after being pushed down. That evening, when he returned to his hotel, his phone buzzed non-stop. Notifications flooded in. Breaking news: Skynova Airlines issues public apology for racial profiling incident. CEO Daniel Whitmore announces $5 million donation to civil rights foundations. Skynova to launch company-wide diversity audit led by independent firm. The official statement appeared on every major news site. Skynova Airlines apologizes to the passenger of flight SNX 904 for unacceptable discriminatory behavior. The company accepts full responsibility and is committed to reforming its internal culture, ensuring transparency and investing in social equity. Jordan skimmed the article, then exhaled softly. His name did not appear anywhere. Only the phrase, "a prominent business leader." He smiled. Recognition didn't matter. What mattered was impact. A system had just been forced to look in the mirror and realize it was not as clean as it thought. 2 days later, on the flight back to New York, Jordan sat in first class again, this time on another airline. In front of him, the screen played a news broadcast. On it, CEO Daniel Whitmore stood before reporters speaking calmly, eyes fixed on the camera. Fairness doesn't come from words, but from action. Skynova will change, not because of public pressure, but because it's the right thing to do. Jordan watched quietly. Not with pride, not with bitterness, just with the peace of a man who had done what was necessary. A flight attendant approached gently. "Mr. Carter, may I get you anything else?" He smiled and shook his head. "No, thank you. Just a glass of water." When she walked away, he turned toward the window. The sky stretched endlessly ahead, sunlight glinting on the wings like ribbons of silver. Below, the earth looked small, its people even smaller. But he knew that every right action, no matter how small, could shift the sky itself. Jordan whispered to himself, justice, when planted with reason, blossoms into faith. When the plane landed at JFK, his phone lit up again, hundreds of messages from his Nexus Vision team. The news spread through the office. The partnership with Helvetia had been officially signed. His employees sent photos of their celebration, smiling brightly, holding a handmade banner that read, "We see the world through your vision, Jordan." He smiled, eyes glistening, not from success, but from gratitude that he had not betrayed their faith. As Jordan stepped out of the airport, the New York wind whipped through the air. He straightened his collar and looked up at the sky where a Sky Nova jet passed overhead, leaving a long white trail like a thread stitching the past to the future. He murmured to himself, "Some wounds need to be seen before they can heal. And sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about forcing people to become better." Across the city, the skyscrapers gleamed in the late afternoon sun. Jordan Carter smiled and stepped into the flow of the crowd. On his face there was no trace of the man once humiliated, only the calm strength of someone who had made the world look at itself. And somewhere above, justice was still flying steady strong and needing no one's permission. 1 week later, Sky Nova released the results of its independent investigation. The international press called it a turning point in 21st century corporate ethics. Millions of shares, thousands of comments praised the courage of a man who chose to act instead of staying silent. Jordan Carter gave no interviews. He posted only one sentence on social media: "I don't want anyone else to have to sit in seat 34B just because they look different." That single line spread across the world like a wake-up call. Other corporations began reviewing their internal policies, and business schools adopted the Sky Nova incident as a case study in ethical leadership. That evening, Jordan returned to his small apartment in Manhattan and opened the window, gazing at the stars scattered across the sky. Somewhere out there, hundreds of flights were taking off, and he knew that every seat, whether 2A or 34B, now carried a new meaning, that human dignity never depends on where one sits, but on how one chooses to stand when they have been pushed down. 1 year later, in the main auditorium of Harvard Business School, the lecture titled "The Carter Effect," When Justice Meets Power, became the most cited topic in global leadership and management. On stage, Jordan Carter, dressed simply in a grey suit, did not speak about contracts, shares, or prejudice. He spoke about the responsibility that comes with power. When you have a voice, use it to lift others up, not to keep them beneath you. The audience rose in applause, many students with tears in their eyes. Among them, a young black woman whispered to her friend, "I'll never be afraid to stand up again." Jordan smiled. He knew his story was no longer just his own. From a stolen first-class seat, he had helped change an entire industry. As he left the hall, he looked up at the blue sky beyond the glass. A plane passed overhead, leaving a long white trail behind it, and he whispered, "At last, justice has learned to fly." From the perspective of an expert in ethical leadership, Jordan Carter's journey is not just a story about discrimination or power, but proof that corporate culture only truly changes when someone has the courage to face the truth. He did not choose revenge. He chose to redefine justice through action. If you believe that dignity cannot be bought, then like and subscribe to help spread this message. And comment below with one phrase that reflects your belief. Keep justice.